and we are streaming live right now. Welcome everybody. Welcome to the UAE Careers Community. I'm Maria Vitratos, zooming in from Dubai English Speaking College, Deaf Careers, and I am here with two incredible speakers on our panel today. We're going to be talking about sustainability and careers for the future, specifically in the water industry. We are here today with Rodger Macfarlane, who graduated as a chemical engineer from the University of Surrey in the UK in 1982. Soon after, he specialized in industrial water treatment and managed his first Legionnaire's disease outbreak in 1986. Since then, he has worked in a number of customer-facing and technical management roles for leading water treatment companies around the world. Rodger has spent over 15 years in the Gulf and joined Culligan Middle East in 2011 as technical director. He is based here in Dubai. Rodger is responsible for their accredited water safety plans, risk assessments, and training programs. Sorry, here we go. Culligan manages water across hundreds of industrial, commercial, and residential sites in the region. Thank you for joining us here today, Rodger. Joining us as well is Ajita, Naya, who has a master's in microbiology and environmental science and is an associate fellow of the UK Higher Education Academy. She is an experienced lecturer with more than a decade of teaching both undergraduate and graduate students in Mumbai and Dubai. In addition to lecturing, she was also the academic counselor and institutional effectiveness coordinator at the American College of Dubai, a qualified project management professor, and has managed international educational for sustainable development. That is a mouthful, Ajita. Projects for the World Wildlife Fund for Nature in the UAE and Qatar that was adjudged by UNESCO as one of the 5 best practices in the Arab region. She was invited by UNESCO to present her project design and activities at the World Conference on ESG in Nagoya, Japan. She has represented the UAE in numerous international gatherings on education for sustainable development in Norway, Scotland, Malta, Poland, and Macedonia, Sweden, and Morocco, and is the regional member of the Commission on Education and Communication of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Ajita Naya joined Curtin University, Dubai in January of 2018, and she teaches mathematics and the introduction to statistics to the foundation program and undergraduate students. Welcome, Ajita. It's so great to have you with us here today.
Thank you.
Welcome to everyone. I'm really excited to get this conversation started. I remember before the pandemic, water was the topic. That's what everybody was talking about around the globe. It was the focus, and suddenly it was kind of sidestepped, obviously, with the current pandemic and the issues that we have to face across the globe. But I do believe that it is a conversation we want to continue having, and I know that both of you would agree as well. And I thought that today we could not just talk about the industry and the challenges we face, but also what it looks like from both a corporate perspective and what students should be thinking about from an academic perspective. So let's jump right in. And let's start with my favorite question. Keeping in mind that we will have young people watching this, they're going to want to know a little bit about what you do in your specific roles. I know we just went through your bios, but like putting it into context, what do you do? And telling us a little bit about the job roles that you have and some of the challenges that young people need to be understanding if they do want to go into a role like yours in the water industry. Let's start with Rodger.
Okay, so the thing that I enjoy the most about my job is that after doing this for 40 years, I'm still learning every day. A large part of my job is problem solving. 9 times out of 10, I have either the solution in my head or it's available in one of my online libraries, one of my reference libraries. But on many occasions, I need to research the answer. Of course, Google is often my friend, but of course, the people that are asking the question have got access to Google as well. So many times I'm having to kind of look sideways at a problem, ask things in a different way in order to get the answer that I'm looking for. And sometimes I need to dig an awful lot deeper in order to get the answer to the problem. That's something that really fascinates me, is that, you know, someone who's been doing the job for as long, this kind of thing, I mean, working in the industry for as long as I have, you think you've got all the answers, you know it all, but actually the important thing from my point of view is that a lot of the time I know where to find the answer, not necessarily have the answer in my head. And some of the people that I'm answering are actually technically quite competent people. They're not asking a stupid question. They're asking really quite a tricky question in many cases. I think um, that's probably one of the biggest challenges. Um, if that helps, does that kind of help open the discussion?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Ajita, you're in the classroom, but you were out in the field as well. What are some of the challenges that you face? And maybe tell us a little more about what you do.
Okay, so currently I'm an educator. But even in the past, when I was actually managing education for sustainable development projects, I see a lot of similarity between the two, because in both cases, I was in a learning environment. And whenever I am in a learning environment, I think the one thing that always sort of fascinates me or excites me is that there is some sort of a positivity. So whether you're looking at a learner in a classroom or whether you're looking at a learner, who has come to do a project on sustainability, there's some sort of a hope that they're coming to you with. And that positivity is what I really would, like to translate into something that is more meaningful, something more challenging. So definitely in the classroom, I know there can be multiple challenges because we get students of different kinds, of different intellectual levels, different understanding levels. So the good thing about teaching is every time you go to a classroom, the one thing that I always believe in is that you need to first unlearn. Only then can you really learn and teach. So every day for me is like a new experience, because it may be a topic you've done, for donkey's years, but even then, I think when you come into the classroom on a day, it could be the most challenging day for you, because you may have students who just do not get it the way you have been trying to communicate regularly. So you've got to have a change of tactics. And that really works as a challenge as well, So there are the pluses of being an educator, and of course, if you look at it from a project management perspective, which I was doing earlier with sustainability, the challenges are manifold. It comes in different directions, So it could be that there is a project that a particular school wants to do on sustainability, but then they do not have enough resources. Or if they have enough resources, then, when I say resources, it could be financial resources or it could be human resources. But then not all projects can be really implemented because you need a whole lot of permissions. So how do you get a particular community to work on a project despite their challenges? So their challenge becomes our challenge. And, how do we try and manage that? I think that's something that I've learned over the years of working on projects and managing the challenges. So yes, whether an educator or whether a project manager, I think it's been a great experience of learning always.
Incredible. Rodger, how does that show up in the organization? Being the technical director, this idea of learning to unlearn so that you can learn. How does that show up in the organization from a leader's perspective with employees in your industry?
I think the important thing from my perspective is it's very easy to be a know-all in my job, because the all of the people that I'm working with typically have less knowledge than me. So I can end up doing the gospel according to Saint Rodger, where, I just give this great lecture when people come in. The challenge for me is to actually listen to the people and listen to the reason why they're asking the question, and to understand where the gap in their knowledge is. And sometimes, and this is something that I do over the last few years I've tried to work at really hard is, rather than just sitting and giving a lecture across my desk, is to actually say to people, do you know, you can go and find this information for yourself, and to teach people to fish rather than to fish for them, if you see what I mean. I think that that's something that I've had to work quite hard on, because it's very, very easy in the role that I'm in to just take the position of the teacher. I know everything, you know nothing, so it's okay, I'll just transfer it to you. But actually, in the long term, that doesn't really help people. And it certainly doesn't help people if I'm not around for whatever reason. I may have to go out for a customer visit, I may be on leave, I may have been run over by a bus, but somehow I'm not available. And these guys need to learn how to kind of answer the questions for themselves. And that's certainly been that doesn't work when my boss appears at the door. I have to say that there are exceptions to the rule. My boss appears at the door, he asks a question, he's not interested in me teaching him how to fish. Here's the fish, please go away. Thank you. That's good. But you know, the younger guys, you know, they want to learn. They want to learn how to learn, and they want to learn where to find the information. And sometimes I'll give them an article that I've written, or a paper that I've written, or a bulletin that I've written, and they'll take that away as the learning. So rather than me teaching them, they can then read it and then come back and ask some questions.
Incredible. That's a big learning, would you say, Ajita, especially with students who are so used to sitting in a classroom and being kind of passively on that journey of learning, to then have to gain those skills. Like you were saying, Ajita, the idea of like them being able to learn what you're trying to teach them, but also preparing them for the next step, where they would end up at Rodger's doorstep, having to be able to gain and find the knowledge rather than waiting for their line manager to give them that knowledge.
You know, absolutely, Rodger is absolutely right, because one of the things that we emphasize when a unit is designed, or when a curriculum is designed for a particular course, is that it's not, I mean, there's very little of actual teaching that happens, right? And in the sense that you're going to class and you're actually lecturing. There's a whole, in fact, I remember the last semester, there was one whole unit where there was no exam at all. Everything was a project. So, and when there is a project that a student needs to do, then there is all that you can do is nudge the student to go and look for resources, so that, you know, the student comes up with some concrete answers for the question that he's looking for. I mean, for the solutions for the project that he's looking for. So I think in addition to, you know, just merely giving them information, I think the course design or the curriculum design these days is such that there's a lot of critical thinking that students need to do. There's a lot of self-learning that students need to come up with. And in addition to that, they not only learn how to look for information, they learn to look where should they go and look for the information. Well, we can always guide them, and then the other thing is they learn a lot of other skills. So that's something that is, you know, incredibly sort of, you know, a successful venture that now we have as part of the curriculum is you don't, they learn presentation skills. They learn how to be concise. I mean, you are given 5 minutes, and within 5 minutes, how do you present your complete project? I mean, how do you sell it to somebody? So if you're going to sell me your project, how can you do that in 5 minutes? So we say it's like the, you know, the elevator pitch. How do you come up with that just in that 30 seconds, 40 seconds? So students are trained in different ways, so that at the end, when they graduate, I think they, in addition to the knowledge that they have theoretically, I think there's a lot of other skills that they need to acquire. And I think that's so very important in this world today, because to me, I feel that, you know, especially the pandemic has opened this whole thing about you may have managed this pandemic and you may have managed this disruption with a whole lot of digital transformation. But the one thing that I always tell students, and I think one thing that I also believe in, is that, you know, such disruptions, more disruptions are just around the corner. So what we need to really be is agile. And when I say agile, it basically means you equip yourself with a whole lot of other skills as well, in addition to your qualification, so that whatever is the need of that hour, you are able to sort of, be successful at that point in time.
Incredible. Thank you so much. And I like how you swayed us to another topic that we really need to be talking about is what's the job market like right now in your industry and how has it been affected by the pandemic? Rodger, let's start with Culligan. I know that we had this conversation a couple of times already, but keeping in mind that we're now at a different stage of the pandemic, many people are starting to feel the light at the end of the tunnel because of the vaccination program. But then with what's currently happening in India, we have concerns and fears of, are we nearing the end of this or are we starting again? How has the industry been affected? And, is there a market for young people? Should they be considering the water industry in their future?
Okay, let's talk about the effects of the pandemic first. We've got, our business, as I've explained before, is split up into a number of business units, different sectors. We've got a large food service division focused on the food service industry, restaurants, coffee shops, hotels, and so on and so forth. And many of the food service outlets were closed during the lockdown in 2020, just closed. So that was like turning off a light switch for us. There was just nothing. We went from business to no business in that sector altogether. Since then, some of them have not reopened. You can go around the malls and see that for yourself. They closed and they've not reopened. Of those that have reopened, some are operating at reduced capacity. And in some cases, for some of the restaurants and coffee shops, that's a disaster. There's one particular place that we visit literally, we walk past it every weekend, and they have 3 tables now. The authorities have basically closed off most of the place, and they've got 3 tables. If it wasn't associated with a food supermarket that's probably still operating at the same level, they would have closed it by now, I'm sure. Some have taken the opportunity to reduce our scope. So we don't need that anymore. That service that you were providing for us, we've now got some spare people. So now we'll do that ourselves. So the level of business that's coming from that market has definitely dropped. We've seen a pickup during 2020, latter part of 2020, but it's kind of plateaued out now. And it will plateau out until some of these places that are operating at reduced capacity are back up to full capacity. We've always had a strong presence in the projects market, equipment, pre-commission cleaning, and so on and so forth. The heavy, what we would describe as the heavier end of our business. And the projects market slowed dramatically during the pandemic, during lockdowns and so on last year. Some of those projects have restarted, but the number of new projects that are coming through, definitely lower. It's definitely slower than it was before. So what that means, thankfully, we've been able to diversify. We've been able to move off into new products, new markets, and new sectors. So because we've been able to do that, we've only had to shed about 10% of our workforce. I'm sure a lot of businesses in similar positions to us have been hit a lot harder. But the interesting thing, and this leads to the bigger question that you were asking about the water industry, we are not aware that any of our competitors, any of the other companies that are working in the same sector have closed, have shut up shop and gone bankrupt or whatever. They're all seeming to manage to keep going. And the reason for that is because water is a fundamental. It's applicable in so many different areas that there's always going to be some sort of market for it. The market may reduce as as businesses, are struggling during the pandemic, but it'll come back. And when the UAE, Dubai in particular, starts to pick up in the business from the tourism industry, the travel and tourism industry, things will come back dramatically. I'm absolutely confident of that. Dubai has managed the pandemic extremely well. You can look at so many countries around the world who have either been disastrous, no names, no pack drill, you know, we know who they are. And there have been some, the Icelands and the New Zealands, the smaller islands of the world, who've done remarkably well, considering that Dubai is right at the center of everything and there's people coming and going from various different countries. I think that the governments, you know, between the federal governments and the governments of the Emirates have done an absolutely remarkable job to get us to the position where we are, which is very much on the road to recovery. And we're starting to see the, you know, the green shoots of things being relaxed slowly as time is going on. And I think that's been the key. It's been very easy for some countries to say, everything's all good, let's relax everything. And then that's ended up with another wave of problems. What the UAE has been very cautious about is relaxing very gently and very slowly, and then not being caught with second and third waves in the way that some other countries are. And I think what that will do is it will open up opportunities for companies in our business who are still there. We're still there waiting for the opportunities to open up. We've managed to stay here. We've managed to keep as much of our workforce as we can ready for when those opportunities come along.
Incredible. A couple of key things I heard you say is water is a fundamental. In some capacity, we will always need it. It's a fundamental. And then also location-wise and thinking about the countries and the types of opportunities that may exist will differ from country to country.
Yes.
Ajita, how does that translate in the world of academia? I know working in a secondary institution, students, young people think about studying at university. They're not really thinking in the long run about what they're going to be doing with those degrees unless they go into a very specific degree-focused career. With what Rodger has just been saying and you're being able to see, obviously, what's going on around the world, how prepared would you say students are for job markets in an industry like this one? Or are they even thinking that far ahead at a university level?
I think, you know, this pandemic and the whole situation that has sort of sprung up because of that has got students really thinking, in the sense that they definitely were on a path of to graduate, so maybe doing a business course or maybe doing an IT course, but they've also realized that given that the job market is not very strong as it was, whether it's local or it's international job market, because of the pandemic, there has been a major cut down of workers. They have tried to, and I know many students who have tried to sort of equip themselves with other skills. So they've tried to do other programs and they've tried to learn things that are besides what they need to do. And that, I think at Curtin also, they've been given a lot of these, talks by people who can actually come and, I mean, people who have been coming there, experts have been coming there and talking to students, I mean, online, of course, and sort of letting them know what are the different areas that students must be sort of equipped with, so that, you know, should they, for example, if you're doing only cybersecurity, then what else can you do so that, you know, in addition to your basic graduation, what else you are equipped with, so that you can at least start a career and then maybe take off elsewhere. So, well, there has been a fear and students have been worried, but at the same time, I think universities have been sort of, they have taken care to sort of, you know, assuage that by sort of providing students the whole lot of other avenues for self-growth. So yes, there is.
And are they directing them into, because I think what Rodger said is really important, this understanding of choosing an industry that has a fundamental feature that will always make them employable. Are they thinking about those key elements, would you say, or is it just that they're, you know, listening to the news in the now? Because it's really about predicting the next few years, isn't it? And we are in a rapidly evolving environment right now. And as you said earlier, there will always be disruption. We need to prepare ourselves for being agile through these disruptions.
And I think that's one of the things that, you know, we have as teachers, when we are teaching a particular topic or a particular course, I think one of the key things that I always emphasize is that you should not be looking at a particular course just merely from the academic perspective. How will you be able to use this knowledge that you have? For example, when I do statistics, I tell them that statistics is one course that, you don't look at a career in statistics, but how can you really use statistics in maybe in public policy? How can you use statistics in, say, for example, project management? How can you use statistics in maybe in the food industry, in the water industry, in the data analytics industry? So how will you actually use what you know in the other industries? And that is where your success lies. You cannot be focused on just the academic part of it, but you need to understand the applications of it. And I think that's what we emphasize whenever we do a unit with students, that they need to keep their mind open. So even if you're doing psychology, how can you actually use psychology in the different areas? You have industrial psychology, you have other areas of psychology. So how can you actually put your knowledge into that? And that's something that I think students are being trained to think, because otherwise you can just be thinking, oh, I'm doing psychology, I can only do a master's and then maybe do, a counselor, that's all. No, there are various other areas that you need to think of. And that is why I think, as far as I'm concerned, I always push students to tell them that, don't think of it just as one unit. You've got to be open-minded and sort of take in as much as from the other subjects as well, and learn it as an interdisciplinary course always.
Yes,
incredible.
I would totally agree
key
with
element. That. This idea of how am I going to use knowledge? Because as Rodger said right at the beginning, we have to teach our staff and our students how to fish rather than just giving them the fish.
Completely agree with that.
So Ajita, I'm going to move you closer to our next question and kind of moving on and evolving what you've been telling us is, how can young people or university students consult companies and use statistics in reclaiming water and turning it into a cost-saving industry or a cost-saving exercise in the industry?
Well, I can give you from a personal perspective in terms of how we have sort of advised students and advised communities, advised schools in how they can use the data. So one of the things that in my earlier job, when I was handling a huge conservation project where we had about 66 schools from all over the UAE working on conservation per se, and one of the two key elements that they had to work on was water and electricity. And the way we would sort of explain, sort of try and get them to work is, what is it that, how do you know that you're making a change? So the only way you can know that you're making a change is if you are able to gather data on a regular basis. So whether it's water conservation or electricity consumption, we tell them to keep monitoring it on an every month. So one of the skills that, again, that came up there is that students did not know how to look at a water meter, how to look at the electricity meter, because they know it's there, but they've never gone there before. So here you have now students actually going and learning how to do the metering of water. I mean, how to read that there. And then over a period of time, say on a year, on a monthly basis for over 2 years, how do you make out whether you have progressed, or how do you make out whether you have really not made any progress? And the other thing that and then of course we try and engage experts with them and help them, use software where they can actually see how this data translates into some sort of an information, how this data translates into some sort of a usable material that they can actually write a small report about. And then the other thing also, what I saw was that along with such activities, when you are trying to get students or when you're trying to get communities to be involved in data gathering, there is also this understanding that they get that many a times you put in the effort, but you may not see the result. You may not see the result immediately. So this whole thing about continuing to change your attitude, you may be able to do something today and you're not going to get a result tomorrow. So how do you develop a long-term attitude towards water conservation? How do you develop a long-term attitude towards energy conservation? So even if you don't see the result today, it's guaranteed that, you know, your school or your community will see it in the years to come, provided you have created that attitude. You have helped develop that attitude. So it was a multi-fung, sort of, we profited in different ways. I mean, not only in helping them save water, but also really bringing about change in attitudes.
Thank you. Rodger, moving it on to you. Ajita just gave us some gems in what she was saying in preparing the youth and coming from her experience. Let's take it from technical director perspective. How can we be reclaiming water and turning to save costs with water?
We actually spend quite a lot of time doing that now. Cooling systems which have cooling towers use water. And there is a rule in Dubai now where new cooling systems, when they're installed, can't use drinking water. Cannot. Not allowed at all. Doesn't matter what happens, they're not allowed to use it. So that's now forcing people who are building these things and installing these things into thinking about using alternative water supplies. So grey water. Grey water is essentially washing water, sinks and showers and washing machine wastewater, and treated sewage effluent, TSE as it's called, which is the water that comes out from the back end of a sewage treatment plant once it's been treated. In some parts of Dubai, there is like a ring main where that water is available, and typically it's used for irrigation, but a lot of people are now starting to use that for cooling tower makeup. So we've been involved with that for a number of years. Using some of those waters can be very tricky when you put them into cooling systems because the chemistry gets complicated. I won't bore you with the gory details, but once you've got detergents, and it's detergents that are the biggest problem. The detergents make their way through the sewage treatment plant and out the other side, which then makes it really tricky to use them in cooling systems. So what we've now done is we can take it in a number of different directions. We can either help customers to use the water as it is. It's quite wasteful, but they can actually do that. Or we use a polishing process, a reverse osmosis plant, to polish the water before it's used. What's now starting to happen is that customers who have, in many cases, slightly smaller systems that are running on drinking water, some of the more sort of legacy systems, are now saying, well, can we not do something? Can we not install something that will take the water that we're currently throwing away and treat it so that we can put it back in again? And then we throw a much smaller quantity away. And we've invested some time and effort to come up with literally packaged containerized units, which, you know, the customer can just have delivered off the back of a truck, put the wastewater, you know, the water that's currently being thrown away in one end, put the little drain back down to the drain here, plug some electricity in, and away it goes. And I mean, we've literally got a number of these things up and running now where, strictly speaking, the customer doesn't throw any water away at all, because the small amount of water that's coming out of the back end of this will go into irrigation. So there literally is no water that goes down the drain at all anymore. So that's becoming, and it's not just about us pushing this. This is something that's being pulled by the customers. So the customers are now saving money. And it's helping their green credentials. Many of these organizations have ISO 14,000 and so on. So it's part of the 14,000 process that the customers are expected to come up with sustainable projects, if you see what I mean, to reduce energy, to reduce water and reduce waste. And this does too, because it's reducing waste and in some cases eliminating waste, and it's reducing their water bill, because the amount of water that they're using is being cut down. There's some part of it that they can't do anything about. They can't reduce the amount of water that's being evaporated, because that's connected to the amount of heat that they want to get rid of. but the amount of water that they throw away, the blow down or wastewater, that's the prize. That's the bit that everyone's wanting to work on. So the really good news is that when we deliver one of these and we install it, the guy who at the customer side, whose great idea it was to do something like this, suddenly he's as proud as Punch. He's got his chest puffed out, and because this was his idea. And from our point of view, a happy customer is the best type.
Incredible. Rodger, in all this, the customer being happy, saving costs, the environment is happy, we're saving the environment. What types of jobs are being lost and what types of jobs are being created? And is this industry, would you say, being in it, is this a highly rewarding career that young people should be paying attention to?
The rewarding careers are mostly in the private sector. In my humble opinion, they're not so much in the public sector, because generally speaking, if you're working in the public sector, you're focused on one particular area. You'll be working on a desalination plant, or you'll be working on a wastewater plant. And there may be a very, very interesting project there. Fascinating. But in the private sector, such as where we sit, we've got tentacles going out in all different directions. At one end, we're producing water for dialysis systems, and we've got bottled water, bottle-free water. You know, we've got that at that end. We've got the kind of the small, high-quality water end. At the other end, we've got stuff that I've just been talking about. The cooling tower water. We're dealing with power plants. We're dealing with pre-commission cleaning, big chemical engineering. We've got some stuff sitting out in our yard at the moment, some pumps and filters and so on and so forth, each of which maybe weighs 30, 40 tons. Big pieces of equipment. And so it's a very diverse, we have several different divisions that are working into this, and we have people who go across the divisions. You know, we'll have a guy who's working in one section one day, and the next section he'll say, well, actually I've got an interest in doing this, or an opportunity in doing this. And I would say, there's lots of opportunities. We've got analysts, we've got production guys, we've got service guys. I mean, the service guys are they're not just technicians with a spanner. These guys have got their own little water treatment test kit that they carry around with them. They're like a mini laboratory that is taken to the customer site. There's a lot of kind of consulting aspects with it, where we're advising customers the right way, the wrong way, what's the best solution for this. And that can be literally, and that's not necessarily on the big projects either. This can be small things like a coffee shop. I'll give you a really good example. A coffee shop, they want to produce coffee and they want the coffee to taste good. So they need to know from us, what's the best way to do that? We're starting with Dubai Town Mains water. How do we get from there to the water that we need to produce the best tasting coffee? You would think it would be really easy, wouldn't you? We just get a pipe and you go from here to here. It's nowhere near as simple as that. If you have too much salts left in the water, you don't extract enough taste from the bean. If you don't have enough salts in the water, if you purify it too much, you end up with bitter coffee because you've extracted too much from the bean. And don't get me started with alkalinities and pHs and so on and so forth. You would think that it would be really, really, really simple, wouldn't you? But if you go into any coffee shop here, I won't mention the names, but any of the major brands, you will know who they are. Even if they've just got a little kiosk, there will be a little water treatment plant buried in the kiosk somewhere. And in the bigger shops, it's a decent sized plant in the back room. And in the really big restaurants, it can be a piece of capital plant that's hidden up in the ceiling, maybe $100,000 worth of capital plant hidden up in the ceiling to produce all the different types of water that are used in different parts of the restaurant. So you've got washing water, you've got food and beverage water, you've got literally just hose down water. So each of the different types of water are produced in-house. Without that system working, the place can't open. It literally cannot operate. So there's a fascinating side of this in every little part of our business.
Bringing it together, yes, it's definitely a highly rewarding industry to go into, but being more attentive to whether to go into public or private and having more opportunities, as you were saying from your experience, you see in that private industry. Ajita, just before we start to wrap it up, and hearing what Rodger was saying about the different job roles, like being an analyst, a service, a consultant, advising, I hear lots of areas where a statistician would be needed, the skills of how to use that knowledge. Would you say that after this conversation that the water industry and helping your students going into water would definitely be something that you might be suggesting? Or are you thinking, no, I think we should be directing them down a different path of careers?
No, I think, I mean, I always considered like water is a very defensive product, you know. I mean, like Rodger said, it's fundamental. So the water industry, I mean, I was always under the impression actually that, you know, pandemic or no pandemic, the demand for water was always there. So yes, maybe the commercial demand for water went down, but household demand increased. So as an industry, the water industry definitely has a lot of scope. And again, Rodger mentioned that we are not only looking at the technical side of it, there are other areas where within the water industry itself, you need personnel. So I would still recommend that whatever course or whatever career a student wants to take on, I think the water industry is one area where there's never going to be really a major decline, and it definitely will be one of the key industries for the future. And also bearing in mind that yes, water is a very defensive product. There is always a demand for water, but with this big thought in mind that water conservation must be a top priority, because pandemic or no pandemic, we still can have droughts, we still can have floods, we still can have storms. So, and that a lot of that is because of the climate change impacts. So the way we use water is definitely what is going to decide what is going to happen to us in the future in terms of the climate change impacts. And that in turn will definitely have an impact on our careers and our future. So for sure, I would definitely advise students to look at water industry as one of their choices, irrespective of what, you know, course they major in, because it's got a lot of areas where they can actually look up.
Thank you, Ajita. Rodger, just top 5 occupations or job roles that you think, pay attention, young people, we really need more of this in my industry?
In my industry, I would say analysts, people who properly understand about water chemistry. Someone who's not just experienced in using a piece of equipment, but actually understands the total story about water chemistry. I would say there's always an opportunity for salespeople, and generally speaking, the best salespeople are the ones who've come in through the service route. They have been used to going out on site and getting their hands dirty, taking samples, doing analysis themselves, not just taking a bottle and running it back to the laboratory, but doing the analysis themselves, looking at the customer systems, interacting with the customers. Those I would say would be really important. An interesting thing, and it was something that picks up on something that Ajita was saying just now. Before I came here, when I was in the UK, I actually used to work with one of the local technical colleges, and I used to go, it was about once every 6 months. It wasn't very frequent, but every 6 months or so, I used to do a kind of a visiting lecturer thing, where I would go in and I would just do a module about water chemistry. I would just do a few lectures, and it was a very focused thing. I wasn't teaching them about chemistry. These were people who were from various courses. So people who were from maybe an environmental science course, people who were from a chemistry course, and so on and so forth. And I would bring them all together and just teach them. And it was a kind of a thing that people could come to or not come to. It wasn't mandatory. But I would just bring the whole thing together and say, right, here's what water chemistry is all about. And these are the bits you need to know, and these are the bits you don't need to know, and this is how it all interacts. And it was amazing the number of people who contacted me later to find, to let me know, hey, I've got myself a job in the water treatment industry of one sort or another. And it was all about having this module that sticks out like a flashing light on their CV. because it's not just an academic module, it's a module that's very specific to the industry that the customer is hiring for.
Thank you, Rodger. Two more job roles that you think young people should be paying attention to in this industry.
I would say, picking up on some of the things that Ajita has said, not just about statistics, but some people who understand how the numbers and the statistics and all that kind of thing can be manipulated using standard tools like Excel. We've got quite a lot of people here who on the face of it are simply sales coordinators, but actually behind the scenes, they're actually doing quite a lot of work on manipulating numbers, developing charts and graphs and trends and so on and so forth for customers. Because it's very easy to come up with a dry table of numbers, but nobody cares about that. What they want is a graph. They want to see the trends. They want to see the statistical analysis, minimums, maximums, you know, the amount of fluctuation that there is in the numbers and so on and so forth. And companies like us are now moving much more into that direction to show customers the trends rather than a dry table of numbers that really nobody can digest. So that's maybe it's not a job title, but maybe it's a skill set. You could call it data analysis, or call them, some people are calling themselves data engineers now, which is that ability to be able to take a dry set of numbers and turn them into something that's meaningful, truly meaningful.
Thank you, Rodger. Should they be thinking about chemical engineering, mechanical engineering? I know engineering is a big thing over on my side with secondary students.
For our industry, chemical engineering every time. The mechanical engineers are useful in other industries. I'm not saying that they're not useful at all, but if you're asking me about my industry, I want someone who can understand, you know, how a piece of equipment works, but it's what's going on inside that equipment. That's where the chemical engineering comes from. And that's where I spend a lot of my time with my customers, because very few of those customers are chemical engineers. Most of them are electrical or mechanical engineers who are working as site engineers or maintenance managers or something like this, who probably didn't do any chemistry, maybe beyond the age of about 11. Maybe some of them were lucky and managed to get to the age of 16. But in those cases, my job is to now simplify that chemistry to make it so that they can understand. I can afford to do that with a customer because that's what I have to do. But I can't afford to do that with guys that are working in our team. They need to be able to understand that first time and be able to, you know, the water chemistry that training that I was talking about earlier on. I've had really well qualified people in tears when I've been teaching them about this, and it's not difficult. It's not advanced chemistry. Sometimes it's actually so simple that it's painful. The guy who had the biggest problem with it that I trained a number of years ago was a PhD chemist. The problem is he'd gone too far out into, you know, this minuscule degree of specialization. And I was teaching him what was barely high school chemistry, but I was teaching it from a very particular angle. He had a real problem with it. To be fair to him, he has gone on to become a technical director of another water treatment company. So he didn't miss out completely, but it was tough for him.
And it brings us back right to the beginning. Ajita was saying it's about being ready to unlearn so that we can learn. Thank you so much, Rodger, and thank you, Ajita, for joining us. And this brings us to the end of an incredible conversation. Today, we were talking about sustainability and careers, particularly in the water industry. We were joined by Ajita Naya, who is currently a lecturer at Curtin University in Dubai, and Rodger Macfarlane, who is the technical director at Culligan, Middle East. We'll see you all again next week. We'll see you all again in June when we bring another incredible conversation to Let's Talk Careers Education. Thank you everyone for coming.